They made sure I would be the only one there. I discovered this 3 hours too late, standing alone in an empty event hall, my suitcase heavy in my hand and my phone buzzing with social media notifications I wish I'd never seen. Photos of my entire family laughing together at a restaurant 5 miles away, posted with captions like impromptu family dinner. And sometimes the best gatherings are unplanned. But this wasn't impromptu. And I wasn't invited. The event hall manager would later tell me they canceled our reservation 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. While I was taking extra shifts to afford the international flight, while I was counting down the days like a child before Christmas, while I was imagining the reunion as a vibrant tapestry of familiar faces and warm embraces, they were planning my humiliation with surgical precision. I had sacrificed everything for this moment. Left my job, spent my savings, rearranged my entire life to fly halfway across the world for what I thought would be the healing my fractured family desperately needed. I had convinced myself it would be worth it. The thought of laughing together, sharing stories and catching up on lost time had filled me with a hopeful excitement I hadn't felt in years. Standing there in that silence, staring at the untouched plates and empty chairs arranged in perfect rows, I realized I had been living in a delusion. This wasn't just neglect or miscommunication. This was warfare. And I had walked into it completely unarmed. The journey itself was exhausting but charged with anticipation. I sat by the airplane window watching clouds drift beneath me, replaying in my mind the plans I had made with my cousins and siblings. I pictured the dinner table laden with food, the children running around the garden, and the adults exchanging updates on their lives. I pictured hugs and apologies for the past, mending wounds that had festered silently between us. I had prepared myself to be the bridge, the one who would finally bring us together. When the plane touched down, I felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with nerves. I grabbed my bags and headed straight to the event hall where the reunion was scheduled. The hall was familiar from old photographs, decorated with faded streamers, the walls echoing with memories of previous celebrations. But as I pushed open the door, the silence hit me like a cold wave. There was no one. No chatter, no laughter, no bustling family members greeting me. Just emptiness. The long tables, arranged neatly with untouched plates and glasses, stood like silent sentinels. The chairs sat in perfect rows, as if waiting for guests who would never arrive. My heart skipped then sank. I glanced at my phone, hoping for a message or a call that would explain this strange emptiness. Nothing. But then I noticed something odd. One table had been disturbed. A single chair pushed back. A napkin crumpled beside an untouched plate. Someone had been here recently. My pulse quickened. Had I missed them by minutes? Or was this a sign of something more deliberate? Asterisk. I stood there, gripping my suitcase handle, feeling the weight of solitude crush me. How could this be? I had crossed continents, endured jet lag and fatigue, and spent every last penny on this trip. All for what? The emptiness seemed to mock me. I replayed every step leading here, searching for a mistake, a missed message, some sign that I had misread the plans. The last time we had spoken, the family group chat had been filled with excitement and promises. Everyone was talking about the reunion, sharing memories, even joking about how long it had been since we were all together. But now, faced with the stark reality of an empty room, I felt betrayed and abandoned. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but instead, I swallowed the lump forming in my throat and tried to steady my trembling hands. I walked over to the disturbed table, running my fingers along the chair's edge. The wood was still warm. My breath caught. Whoever had been here couldn't have left more than an hour ago. I pulled out my phone and checked the family chat again. No new messages, but I noticed something I'd missed before. The last few messages had timestamps from today, recent ones. They had been here. They had been planning something. Without me. Asterisk. I sat down on the edge of one of the empty chairs and let the silence wash over me. The echoes of laughter that should have filled the space were replaced by the distant hum of the air conditioning and the faint rustle of the curtains. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made. The missed workdays, the extra shifts I had taken to afford the trip, the sleepless nights planning the travel logistics. It all seemed useless now. My mind raced back to the months leading up to this moment. I had spent hours on the phone with my aunt, confirming dates and times, double-checking every detail to avoid any mishaps. I had even sent reminders to relatives who seemed to be the least organized. I thought I had done everything right. How had it come to this? I pulled out my phone and started calling the first number in the family directory. My cousin Anna. The call rang through several times before going to voicemail. I left a message, my voice trembling slightly, asking if she was there, if the reunion was still happening. I sent a text too, hoping for a quick reply. Minutes passed. No response. But as I scrolled through her social media while waiting, my blood ran cold. There, posted just 2 hours ago, was a photo of Anna laughing with my uncle and several other family members at what looked like a restaurant. The caption read, "Impromptu family dinner. Sometimes the best gatherings are unplanned." The location tag showed they were less than 5 miles from where I sat alone. ***. Next, I tried my brother Mark. His line went straight to voicemail as well. I left another message, trying to keep my voice steady but failing. I felt a bitter sting of rejection. Why weren't they answering? Had they forgotten? Was this some cruel joke? I reached out to my sister Sarah with the same result. No answer. No message. Nothing. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I began to wonder if I had been stood up, if my family had made plans without me, or worse, if they had deliberately chosen to exclude me. Then my phone buzzed with a notification. Sarah had just posted a story on social media. I opened it with shaking hands. It was a video of the same restaurant, the same group, but now I could hear their voices. "We should do this more often," someone said off camera. "It's nice when it's just us," another voice replied. The words hit me like physical blows. Just us. Without me. ***. Tears prickled at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them away. I refused to break down here, not now. I thought about the last few years, the distance that had grown between us, the misunderstandings and unspoken grievances. Maybe this was the culmination of all the bitterness and neglect. Maybe they didn't want me there after all. But then a surge of anger bubbled up inside me. I had always been the one to forgive, to reach out first after every argument, to make the effort to maintain connections. Had all that meant nothing? Was I so easily discarded? The thought hurt more than I expected. I stood up and walked around the hall, touching the backs of the empty chairs, running my fingers over the smooth tabletop. I imagined the conversations that should have been happening, the stories being told, the laughter ringing through the air. Instead, there was only silence and me. I found myself drawn to a corner where old family photos had been arranged on a display board, photos that I had helped organize months ago during our planning calls. But now, looking closer, I realized something chilling. In several of the photos, my face had been carefully cropped out. The cuts were precise, deliberate. This wasn't an accident or an oversight. This was intentional erasure. ***. I stepped outside into the cool evening air and took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. The street was quiet, the sky painted with soft hues of twilight. I sent another message in the family group chat, asking if anyone was nearby or if the reunion was still on. I waited, watching the screen for any sign of life. Minutes dragged by. The silence remained unbroken. I felt a hollow ache settle deep within me. I thought about turning around, booking a flight back home immediately, cutting my losses. But a small part of me held on to hope that this was some terrible misunderstanding, a miscommunication that could still be fixed. That's when I saw the car. A familiar blue sedan turning the corner, my aunt's car. For a moment, hope flared in my chest. But as it approached, I could see through the windshield that it was full of people, and they were laughing. The car slowed as it passed the hall, and I stepped forward, waving. Inside, I could see my aunt in the driver's seat, my cousins in the back. They saw me. Our eyes met for a split second, and then my aunt pressed the accelerator, and they drove past without stopping. ***. I looked around, wondering if anyone might show up late, if maybe they were caught in traffic or had last-minute emergencies. But the parking lot was empty except for my rental car. The streets were growing more deserted by the minute. It felt as if the world had conspired to leave me utterly alone in this strange place. I pulled out my phone one last time and scrolled through old family photos, the smiling faces of my cousins, the group shots from past holidays, the candid moments frozen in time. I traced the images with my finger, feeling a bittersweet nostalgia. Those memories were real but so far away now, Were they just illusions? Had the family I once knew dissolved into silence? As I scrolled, I found a screenshot I'd taken months ago of our group chat when everyone was excitedly planning the reunion. Reading it now, I noticed subtle patterns I'd missed before. How enthusiasm seemed to wane whenever I contributed ideas, how conversations would shift when I asked questions. The signs had been there all along. I had just been too hopeful to see them. Asterisk asterisk. I felt tears spill down my cheeks despite my efforts to hold them back. The pain of being stood up by my own family was raw and unexpected. I had imagined this reunion as a balm for the loneliness I had felt for so long, but instead, it had become a wound reopening old scars. I sat back down on the curb outside the hall, my suitcase beside me. The night was settling in and I felt utterly lost. I thought about calling my closest friends, anyone who might be an anchor in this moment. But even their voices wouldn't erase the sting of this betrayal. As the stars began to twinkle overhead, I realized I had to face this emptiness head-on. I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew one thing. This wasn't how my story with my family would end. Not without a fight. The next morning, I woke to the dull ache of disappointment still lodged deep in my chest. The empty hall from the night before haunted my thoughts, its silence echoing louder than any words ever could. But alongside the pain was something new. A steely determination. The evidence I'd uncovered yesterday had shifted something inside me. This wasn't just neglect or miscommunication. This was deliberate exclusion, and I deserved to know why. I forced myself out of bed, knowing that wallowing in despair wouldn't bring answers or reconnect me with the family I had longed to see. But instead of the desperate, pleading approach I'd taken yesterday, I decided on a different strategy. I would investigate first, understand the full scope of what had happened, before confronting anyone. I started by diving deeper into social media. What I found was a carefully orchestrated deception. Not only had they planned an alternative gathering, but there were private group chats, ones I wasn't included in, where they'd been coordinating for weeks. Screenshots shared by mutual friends revealed conversations about keeping things small this time and avoiding unnecessary drama. The most crushing revelation came in a message from my brother. "It'll be better without the complications." I began with calls, dialing numbers in the family directory one by one, but this time with specific questions. Each unanswered ring and voicemail message deepened the knot in my stomach, but I was no longer just pleading for connection. I was gathering information. "Please call me back," I said in one message. "I know about the restaurant. I know about the planning. I just want to understand why." Texts followed the calls. No longer desperate pleas but direct confrontations. I saw the photos. I saw Anna's post. "Why didn't you just tell me I wasn't welcome?" The responses that trickled in were defensive, evasive, but they confirmed what I already suspected. This hadn't been an accident. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, my teenage nephew Jake, who hadn't been careful about his social media privacy settings. His story from the night before included audio from their dinner, and in it I could hear my aunt saying, "I feel terrible about this, but it's just easier this way. We can actually relax without walking on eggshells." My uncle's voice followed. "The family's been through enough. Sometimes you have to choose peace over people." Scrolling through old messages in the family chat, I found fragments of conversations from weeks ago with new eyes. Promises to meet, jokes about who would bring what dish, plans made with enthusiasm. All of it had been performance. They'd known from the beginning that they were planning something else. The real conversations had been happening elsewhere. I remembered the last heated exchange we'd had months earlier. A disagreement over something that had seemed trivial at the time but had spiraled into weeks of silence. Reading through those messages now, I could see how it had been the excuse they were looking for, the justification for cutting me out. But the most shocking discovery came when I called the event hall directly. The manager, confused by my inquiry, told me something that made my blood run cold. "Ma'am, your family canceled the reservation 3 weeks ago. They said the event was off. We tried to reach you for confirmation, but we only had your aunt's contact information as the primary booker." I tried to shake off the magnitude of this betrayal, but it clung stubbornly. They hadn't just decided not to come. They had actively worked to ensure I would show up alone. This wasn't passive exclusion. It was calculated humiliation. The phone buzzed suddenly and my heart leapt. A message from my cousin David appeared. Sorry I couldn't make it. Things have been complicated. But now, armed with everything I knew, his words felt like salt in a wound. I quickly replied, not with pleading but with facts. I know you were at the restaurant with everyone else. I saw the photos. If you don't have the courage to tell me the truth, at least don't lie to my face. His response came hours later, and for the first time it contained a crack of honesty. Look, everyone felt like things were too tense with you around. We didn't know how to say it. The restaurant thing just happened. It was a start, but it left me with more questions than answers. More importantly, it confirmed that this had been a group decision. I reached out to others, my aunt, a few more cousins, and this time, armed with evidence, I got more honest responses. The pattern that emerged was devastating. They had been discussing my exclusion for months, using our old argument as justification for a decision they'd wanted to make anyway. You've been so angry lately, one cousin wrote. We just wanted one peaceful gathering. Another said, it's not personal, but family events are supposed to be fun. In the quiet moments between messages, I found myself replaying every family gathering, every word exchanged in recent years, but now with the benefit of knowing what they had really been thinking. I thought about the subtle signs I had missed, the cold shoulders, the whispered conversations that stopped when I entered the room. I hadn't been paranoid. I had been perceptive. My instincts had been correct all along. I remembered an incident last year. A comment from an uncle that had seemed harmless but now felt loaded with meaning. He joked about me being too intense for family gatherings. A comment I'd brushed off with a laugh. But now it echoed in my mind as evidence of a growing campaign to position me as the problem. The uncertainty that had gnawed at me was replaced by a different kind of pain, the pain of absolute clarity. This wasn't punishment or a temporary rift. This was exile, carefully planned and ruthlessly executed. The thought made my chest tighten, but strangely it also brought a kind of relief. At least now I knew where I stood. ***. I decided to send a longer message to the family group chat. But instead of pouring out my feelings and vulnerability, I laid out the facts. I mentioned the canceled reservation, the social media evidence, the coordinated deception. I asked not for forgiveness or inclusion, but for basic honesty. If you don't want me in your lives, at least have the courage to say so directly instead of setting elaborate traps. The response was swift and revealing. Instead of denials or apologies, I received angry messages about invading privacy and making everything about yourself. The mask had finally slipped completely. Sarah wrote, "This is exactly why we didn't want you there. You turn everything into a drama." Mark added, "We're tired of walking on eggshells around you." But the most revealing response came from my aunt, who had always been the family peacemaker. "We've been talking about this for months. Everyone agreed that family gatherings are more relaxed without certain people there. It's not meant to be cruel, but sometimes hard decisions have to be made for the good of the group." The lack of any real remorse was crushing, but it was also liberating. I felt invisible in their responses, as if my pain didn't matter. But I also felt the fog of confusion lifting. I wondered if I had been foolish to hope for reconciliation, if I had been chasing an illusion all along. But beneath the despair, a stubborn ember of self-respect remained. I didn't want to understand anymore. I wanted to decide what came next. I called my oldest friend, someone who had known me since childhood. Their voice was a balm, steady and comforting, as I poured out not just my confusion and hurt, but my anger and my newfound clarity. They listened to the evidence I'd gathered, the messages I'd received, the calculated nature of the betrayal. "You know what this is, don't you?" they said gently. "This is emotional abuse. This is a family scapegoating you and then gaslighting you about it." Their words gave me more than hope. They gave me validation and a framework for understanding what had happened. This wasn't about my flaws or my behavior. This was about a dysfunctional family system that needed someone to blame for their problems, and I had been elected to serve that role. As the day wore on, I continued reaching out, but now with a different purpose. I wasn't trying to repair relationships or force forgiveness. I was setting boundaries and demanding basic respect. Some family members, uncomfortable with the light being shown on their behavior, retreated further into defensiveness. Others, perhaps feeling guilty, offered weak apologies that felt more like attempts to avoid consequences than genuine remorse. I thought about writing a letter, but I realized that words on paper wouldn't change people who had already decided to see me as the problem. Instead, I began documenting everything: screenshots, messages, timelines. Not for revenge, but for my own clarity and as protection against future gaslighting. ***. In the quiet moments, I reflected on the family I had known. The laughter, the shared history, the unspoken promises of always being there for each other. I mourned the loss of that certainty, but I also began to see it for what it really was. A myth I had clung to despite mounting evidence to the contrary. But I also realized that this pain, as sharp as it was, revealed something important: that I still had the capacity to care deeply, to fight for connection, to refuse to be diminished. That, despite everything, my instinct was still to reach out rather than withdraw. The problem wasn't that I cared too much. The problem was that I had been caring for people who had stopped caring about me. The unanswered calls and defensive responses became a backdrop to my thoughts. A reminder that family was complicated, and sometimes irreparably broken. I knew that the silence I faced now was part of a larger story. One filled with projection, scapegoating, and the messy realities of dysfunctional family systems. That evening, I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of sitting alone with my pain, I researched support groups for people who had been estranged from their families. I found an online community of people who had experienced similar betrayals, and for the first time in days, I felt less alone. Their stories were different from mine, but the patterns were eerily similar. Families that needed someone to blame, relatives who chose comfort over truth, and the devastating realization that love alone wasn't enough to overcome dysfunction. ***. I sat by the window that evening, watching the city lights flicker against the darkening sky. I felt exhausted but no longer lost. The path ahead was clearer now, though not the one I had hoped for. I would need to build a new definition of family, one based on mutual respect and genuine care rather than obligation and shared DNA. I wasn't ready to give up entirely. There might still be individuals within the family who could have honest relationships with me, but I was done chasing the fantasy of a loving, unified family that had never really existed. Until then, I would hold on to my newfound clarity, even as I grappled with the loneliness of finally seeing the truth. After days of revelation and confrontation, I realized I couldn't keep spinning in the same exhausting cycle of anger and hurt. The weight of the truth, that my family had deliberately orchestrated my humiliation, pressed down harder with each passing hour, but I refused to let it crush the spirit that had carried me this far. I had to change my approach again. Instead of trying to fix what was broken, I needed to decide what was worth salvaging. The turning point came when I received an unexpected call from my grandmother, who was 92 and lived in a care facility across town. Her voice was shaky but warm as she asked, "Sweetheart, where is everyone? I've been waiting for someone to visit and tell me about the reunion." My heart clenched. They hadn't just excluded me, they had forgotten her entirely. I messaged David again, but this time with a different kind of urgency. Instead of asking about the betrayal, I asked about our grandmother. Did anyone tell Grandma Rose that the reunion was canceled? She's been waiting for news. His response revealed another layer of the family's dysfunction. Oh God, I forgot about Grandma Rose. We were supposed to visit her this week. This gave me something concrete to focus on beyond my own pain. I drove to the care facility that afternoon, bringing flowers and photos from past family gatherings. When I walked into her room, her face lit up with a joy I hadn't seen from any family member in years. "There you are," she exclaimed, reaching out with trembling hands. I was beginning to think everyone had forgotten about me. As I sat with her, sharing stories and listening to her memories, I realized something profound. This was what family was supposed to feel like. Unconditional love, genuine interest in each other's lives, and the simple joy of being together. Sitting across from her, I studied her face, the lines of age, the clarity in her eyes despite her advanced years. She asked about the reunion, and I found myself telling her a gentler version of the truth. "It didn't work out as planned, Grandma, but I'm here now, and that's what matters." She patted my hand with surprising strength. "Family can be complicated, dear. I've lived long enough to see people make mistakes, hold grudges, and forget what's important. But you're here. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Her words hit me like a revelation. In my desperation to be accepted by people who had already rejected me, I had lost sight of the family members who truly valued my presence. I spent the afternoon with her, and when I finally left, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. ***. That evening I reached out to my sister, Sarah, but this time with a different energy. Instead of confronting her about the betrayal, I told her about visiting Grandma Rose. She's been waiting for news about the reunion. She doesn't know what happened. I thought you should know. To my surprise, Sarah called me within an hour, her voice thick with emotion. I feel terrible about Grandma Rose. We got so caught up in our own drama that we forgot about the people who really needed us. Our conversation was tentative, filled with pauses and careful words, but for the first time, I sensed genuine remorse rather than defensiveness. I need to be honest with you, Sarah said finally. What we did was wrong. It wasn't about you being difficult or dramatic. We were cowards. We were afraid of dealing with our own family issues, so we made you the scapegoat. It was easier than looking at ourselves. This admission was more than I had expected from anyone. We talked for over an hour, not about fixing everything, but about acknowledging what had gone wrong. Sarah shared her own feelings of being overwhelmed by family expectations and her fear of confrontation. I listened, understanding for the first time that my presence hadn't been the problem. It had been a mirror that reflected uncomfortable truths they weren't ready to face. Our conversation didn't solve everything, but it cracked open a door that had been slammed shut. We agreed to keep talking, to take things slowly, and to focus on what we could build rather than what we had lost. The next day, I received an unexpected text from Jake, my teenage nephew. I'm sorry about what happened. I didn't think it was right, but nobody listens to me because I'm just a kid. I saved you some cake from the restaurant dinner. Want to meet up? Meeting with Jake was like finding an oasis in a desert. His honesty was refreshing, unburdened by the complex emotional baggage that the adults carried. He told me about feeling uncomfortable during the dinner, about adults making jokes at my expense, about wanting to text me but being told not to. The grown-ups are weird, he said with the blunt assessment that only teenagers can deliver. They act like you're this big problem, but whenever you're actually around, everyone has more fun. I think they're just scared of dealing with real stuff. His perspective was illuminating. From his outside view, he could see the family dynamics more clearly than those trapped within them. Uncle Mark was actually asking where you were during dinner, he revealed. He seemed sad about it, but then Aunt Linda said something about keeping the peace, and he just shut up. ***. Encouraged by these small breakthroughs, I reached out selectively to other family members, focusing on those who showed even the slightest openness. I discovered that several of them had been uncomfortable with the deception but had felt pressured to go along with the group decision. The family dynamics were more complex than I had initially understood. It wasn't universal rejection, but rather a few dominant voices that had shaped the narrative. I began to document my experience and emotions in a journal, but not just the pain and confusion. I wrote about the moments of connection I was finding, the lessons I was learning about boundaries and self-worth, and the slow process of rebuilding relationships on healthier foundations. ***. As I wrote, I realized that my family's betrayal, while devastating, had also been a gift of sorts. It had forced me to see clearly, to stop making excuses for bad behavior, and to recognize my own worth. I had spent years accepting crumbs of affection and calling it love. Now I understood the difference between genuine care and conditional acceptance. One afternoon I decided to take a bold step. I arranged to meet with my aunt, the one who had driven past me at the hall, at a neutral location. I wasn't going to let her control the narrative anymore. ***. The conversation was tense but necessary. I confronted her directly about the canceled reservation, about seeing me and driving past, about the calculated nature of the exclusion. Instead of the defensive anger I expected, she broke down in tears. I knew it was wrong, she sobbed. I've been feeling sick about it for weeks. But everyone was so adamant and I thought maybe they were right, maybe it would be better for everyone. When I saw you standing there, I panicked. I couldn't face what we had done. Her breakdown revealed the psychological toll that the deception had taken on those who participated. They hadn't just hurt me, they had compromised their own integrity. For the first time, I felt something approaching pity for them rather than just anger. Asterisk asterisk. I hesitated before responding, weighing my words carefully. This wasn't about forgiveness, not yet, but it was about understanding. I needed to hear that, I said finally. Not because it fixes everything, but because it's the truth. That's all I ever wanted, the truth. We talked for hours, unraveling the complex web of family resentments, unspoken expectations, and the ways that old wounds had festered into toxic patterns. She admitted that I had become a convenient target for frustrations that had nothing to do with me. A projection of their own failures and disappointments. What emerged from that conversation was a clearer picture of the family system. A group of people who had never learned to address conflict directly, who preferred exclusion to difficult conversations, and who had mistaken silence for peace. Meanwhile, I tried to find moments of peace outside the family turmoil. I explored the city where I had traveled, but now with different eyes. Instead of seeking solace from rejection, I was celebrating small victories and newfound clarity. I met with other estranged family members I discovered through social media, cousins who had been gradually pushed out over the years for similar reasons. Their stories were revelatory. I learned that I was not the first family member to be scapegoated and excluded. There was a pattern of behavior going back years, a system that required someone to blame for every problem. They'll find someone else to target now, one cousin warned me. That's how these families work. Back home, my friends became my anchor, but now I leaned on them with greater self-awareness. I confided in them not just about the pain but about the growth I was experiencing. Their support was unwavering, a reminder that chosen family could be stronger than biological bonds. As days turned into weeks, I saw significant shifts in the family dynamics. My confrontation with my aunt had apparently sent ripples through the family network. Several relatives reached out to apologize, not just for the reunion incident but for years of enabling behavior. Asterisk asterisk. David sent a long message acknowledging his cowardice and inviting me to a casual dinner with him and a few relatives who wanted to reconnect. Sarah and I continued our conversations, slowly building a bridge between us. Even my brother Mark, who had been one of the most vocal about my exclusion, sent a brief but sincere apology. But the most meaningful change came from an unexpected source: my parents. They had been largely absent from the reunion drama, living in another state and relying on second-hand information about family conflicts. When they learned the full extent of what had happened, they were horrified. Asterisk asterisk. We raised you better than this, my mother said in a tearful phone call with my aunt. How could you think we would support treating any of our children this way? Their intervention didn't magically fix everything, but it established clear boundaries and consequences for future behavior. Through it all, I grappled with the complexity of love and disappointment intertwined. I realized that family relationships were messy, filled with contradictions, hope and hurt, closeness and distance, forgiveness and accountability. Yet beneath it all was a shared history that could not easily be erased, and more importantly, a capacity for growth and change that I had underestimated. I reminded myself that rebuilding trust took time, patience, and most crucially, consistent behavior change from all parties involved. The fragile connections I was nurturing were indeed seeds of something new, but they required tending and protection. Asterisk asterisk. The small gatherings that followed were tentative but real. Not everyone participated, and that was okay. I had learned to value quality over quantity, authenticity over performance. The family dinners were smaller but more honest, the conversations deeper but more respectful. In one particularly meaningful moment, my grandmother, who had been filled in on some of the family drama, called a family meeting via video chat from her care facility. With the moral authority that comes from age and wisdom, she delivered a gentle but firm message about the importance of treating each other with dignity and respect. Asterisk asterisk. I don't have many years left, she said, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in months. I don't want to spend them watching my grandchildren hurt each other. Life is too short for this nonsense. Her words carried weight that no one could dismiss or argue with. In the quiet moments, I held on to something more solid than hope. I held on to proof. Proof that change was possible, that accountability could lead to growth, and that some relationships, when approached with courage and honesty, could become stronger after being broken. I resolved to continue being the one who reached out, Not from desperation now, but from strength. I had learned the difference between being accommodating and being a doormat, between being forgiving and being foolish. Asterisk asterisk. Alone in a city that felt both foreign and familiar, I found myself processing not just the weight of family betrayal, but the unexpected strength I had discovered in confronting it. The streets bustled with life around me, but inside, I no longer felt hollow. Instead, there was a different kind of ache, the growing pains of someone learning to value themselves properly. I wandered through parks and narrow alleys, taking in the unfamiliar sights and sounds, but now with a sense of purpose rather than desperate loneliness. The city's rhythm had become a soundtrack to my healing, rather than a stark contrast to my isolation. Children played in the distance, couples laughed over coffee, and old men chatted on benches, life moving forward, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was moving with it rather than watching from the sidelines. I found myself drawn to a small cafe where I had discovered they hosted a weekly support group for people dealing with family estrangement. Walking into that room full of strangers who understood my experience was like stepping into a warm embrace after standing in the cold. Asterisk asterisk. One afternoon, I sat by the same riverbank where I had once felt so lost, watching the water flow steadily past. The relentless current still reminded me that life kept moving, but now that felt empowering rather than overwhelming. I pulled out my journal and wrote not just about swirling thoughts of pain, but about concrete plans for the future, about boundaries I would maintain, and about the relationships I wanted to nurture. A woman sitting nearby noticed my writing and struck up a conversation. She was a therapist who specialized in family trauma, visiting the city for a conference. "You have the look of someone doing important work," she said gently. Our conversation lasted hours, and she helped me understand the psychological patterns I had experienced. "Scapegoating is a form of family abuse," she explained. "Recognizing it is the first step to healing from it." As the days passed, I forced myself to engage with life rather than just endure it. I visited local cafes not to hide from my loneliness, but to practice being comfortable in my own company. I took long walks through art galleries and museums, but now I was connecting with the creativity and stories of others, rather than just using them as distractions. At one gallery, I met an artist whose work focused on themes of family and belonging. Her paintings depicted fractured family portraits with golden threads weaving through the breaks. "Sometimes," she told me, "the cracks are where the light gets in, and sometimes the golden repair makes something more beautiful than the original." Her words resonated deeply. I was learning to see my own fractures not as failures but as opportunities for stronger reconstruction. Asterisk asterisk. Yet, even in these moments of growth and connection, the shadow of what had happened lingered. I thought about the reunion that never was, the empty chairs, and the calculated cruelty that had orchestrated it all. But now, instead of that memory crushing me, it served as a reminder of how far I had come, and how much I had learned about my own resilience. One evening, as I returned to my temporary apartment, my phone buzzed with an unexpected message, not from family this time, but from a colleague back home who had heard about my situation through mutual friends. "I've been thinking about you," the message read. "When you get back, there's a position opening up that I think would be perfect for you. Sometimes when one door closes, another opens." It was a reminder that life was full of possibilities beyond the narrow confines of family approval. The message sparked something in me. A realization that I had been so focused on gaining acceptance from people who didn't value me that I had neglected the opportunities and relationships that were actually available. I began reaching out to old friends, mentors, and colleagues, rebuilding a network of support that wasn't dependent on shared DNA. Asterisk asterisk. I hesitated before responding to the job opportunity, but then I realized that hesitation itself was progress. 6 months ago, I would have immediately dismissed it, worried about what my family would think about such a big change. Now I was considering what I thought, what I wanted, what would serve my growth and happiness. That conversation had been cautious at first, filled with pauses and careful words, but it opened a door to possibilities I hadn't considered. My colleagues shared their own story of family conflict and career transitions, reminding me that personal and professional growth often happen simultaneously. To my surprise, planning for this potential new direction felt exciting rather than terrifying. For the first time in years, I was making decisions based on my own values and aspirations rather than trying to accommodate others' expectations or avoid conflict. Asterisk asterisk. Our talk was tentative, filled with questions about logistics and timing, but it was the first real conversation about my future that didn't revolve around family drama. I realized that beneath the pain of rejection, I had been mourning not just the loss of family connection but the loss of my own identity outside of those relationships. We didn't make any final decisions that day, but we agreed to keep talking when I returned home. That small step toward independence felt like a breakthrough, a beginning rather than an end. In the days that followed, I found myself engaging differently with the world around me. Instead of avoiding mirrors, I looked at myself with curiosity and growing respect. Instead of apologizing for taking up space, I began to own my presence. Instead of shrinking from conflict, I practiced stating my needs clearly and calmly. Asterisk asterisk. I continued to reach out selectively to family members, but now the conversations had a different tenor. I was no longer begging for acceptance. I was offering authentic connection to those who could meet me with the same honesty. Some responded warmly, others with continued defensiveness, and a few not at all. I learned to accept this unevenness without taking it personally. I began to document my experience not just in personal journals but in letters to myself. Messages of encouragement and reminders of lessons learned that I could reference during difficult moments. Writing became a bridge between my pain and my power, a way to transform experience into wisdom. One letter I wrote to myself read, "You are not responsible for other people's comfort at the expense of your own dignity. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. You deserve relationships that are based on mutual respect and genuine care, not just obligation and convenience." As I wrote, I considered whether I should document my experience more formally, perhaps in a blog or article that might help others going through similar situations. The idea both excited and terrified me. What if my family saw it? What if they retaliated? But then I realized that living in fear of their reactions was just another form of allowing them to control my life. I hesitated before taking such a public step, wondering if sharing my story would help or hurt the fragile rebuilding process with family members who were making genuine efforts. But I reminded myself that healing couldn't be contingent on keeping secrets or protecting people from the consequences of their own actions. That afternoon, I started drafting an article about family scapegoating and the journey of rebuilding self-worth after family trauma. The words flowed easily, not with anger or vindictiveness, but with clarity and compassion for others who might be experiencing similar pain. Asterisk asterisk. Meanwhile, I tried to find moments of pure joy outside the heavy work of family healing. I explored the city's hidden gems, small bookshops, local music venues, community gardens where strangers shared stories over shared labor. These experiences reminded me that connection and belonging could be found in many places, not just within family structures. At a community garden, I met an elderly man who had been estranged from his adult children for over a decade. The hardest part, he told me as we planted tomatoes together, was accepting that love sometimes means letting go. I spent years chasing relationships that were hurting both of us. When I finally stopped, we both had space to heal. Some of them came back eventually, but on healthier terms. Back in my apartment, my friends became more than just support. They became mirrors reflecting back my growth and strength. I confided in them not just about the ongoing family situation but about my expanding sense of possibility and self-worth. Their consistent presence was a stark contrast to the conditional love I had experienced from family. As weeks passed, I received updates about changes happening within my family system. The aunt who had driven past me that first night had apparently become an advocate for more honest communication within the family. Several relatives had started going to therapy. Even some of the most defensive family members were beginning to acknowledge that their behavior had been problematic. Asterisk asterisk. But more importantly, I found that I was less dependent on these updates for my emotional well-being. Their growth was encouraging, but it was no longer essential for my healing. I had found my center independent of their approval or disapproval. The most significant shift came when I realized I was no longer checking my phone obsessively for family messages. I was no longer analyzing every interaction for signs of acceptance or rejection. I was simply living my life, open to connection but not desperate for it. Asterisk asterisk. One morning I received a message from my parents asking if they could visit me before I returned home. They wanted to talk in person about everything that had happened and their own role in allowing it to continue unchecked for so long. The old me would have been anxious about such a meeting, worried about saying the wrong thing or setting off more conflict. The new me was curious and calm, interested in what they had to say but not attached to any particular outcome. When they arrived, the conversation was unlike any we had ever had. Instead of the surface-level pleasantries that usually characterized our interactions, we talked about patterns, about accountability, about the difference between peace and avoidance. My mother cried as she apologized for not protecting me better from family dysfunction. My father acknowledged his own role in modeling conflict avoidance rather than healthy boundaries. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was talking to my parents as equals rather than as a child seeking approval. I shared my own insights about family systems, about the difference between reconciliation and rug sweeping, about what I would need to feel safe in family relationships going forward. They listened without defensiveness, asked thoughtful questions, and made specific commitments about how they would handle similar situations in the future. It wasn't a magic solution to decades of dysfunction, but it was a foundation for something more honest and healthy. The conversation ended with them expressing pride not just in my resilience, but in my courage to demand better treatment. "We should have taught you this earlier," my father said. "But watching you learn it on your own has been remarkable. You've become the adult we always hoped you would be, even though we didn't give you the tools to get there." As I prepared to return home, the city around me felt less like a foreign landscape and more like a place where I had undergone a crucial transformation. I realized that healing was indeed a journey without clear maps, filled with setbacks and breakthroughs alike, but I had learned to navigate by my own compass, rather than by others' expectations. I packed my bags with a mixture of emotions that felt more balanced than the raw pain I had carried for so long. Hope tempered by realism, love seasoned with healthy boundaries, forgiveness balanced with accountability. The family I had longed for remained complicated and imperfect, but I carried with me a renewed sense of self and the quiet confidence that came from knowing my own worth. The night before my departure, I stood on the balcony overlooking the city lights one last time, feeling the cool breeze against my skin. The stars twinkled above, no longer indifferent to my struggles but witnesses to my transformation. In that moment I made a silent vow to embrace uncertainty without losing hope, to cherish authentic connections without settling for less, and to find peace within myself regardless of what others chose to do. The decision to return home was not easy, but as I packed my bags, a profound sense of clarity had settled within me. The reunion had not gone as I had dreamed, the empty chairs and calculated exclusion had been devastating, but I was no longer the same person who had arrived full of naive hope and desperate need for validation. The journey had fundamentally changed my understanding of family, loyalty, and self-worth. The transformation was evident in small but significant ways. I booked a flexible return ticket rather than a fixed one, symbolizing my new commitment to making decisions based on my own needs, rather than others' expectations. I also arranged for a longer layover in a city where an old friend lived, prioritizing nurturing relationships over rushing back to uncertain ones. I arranged my departure with a mixture of anticipation and healthy caution. I was no longer eager to please or terrified of disappointing others. Instead, I was curious about what awaited me and committed to honoring the boundaries I had learned to set. Before leaving, I sent one final message to the family group chat, but this time it was not a plea or a question but a clear statement of my evolved position. I'm coming home tomorrow. I've learned a lot about myself and about family dynamics during this time. I'm open to rebuilding relationships based on mutual respect and honest communication. For those ready for that kind of connection, I'm here. For those who aren't, I understand and respect your choice. The responses that came back were telling in their variety. Some family members sent warm, welcoming messages expressing eagerness to reconnect. Others sent defensive responses that revealed they still saw me as the problem. A few didn't respond at all. For the first time, I felt completely at peace with this range of reactions, understanding that each person's response said more about them than about me. When I arrived at the airport back home, I was surprised to see my brother Mark waiting for me. The last time we had spoken, he had been one of the most vocal about my exclusion from family events. Now he looked nervous but determined, "I owe you more than an apology," he said as we walked to his car. "I owe you the truth about why I went along with shutting you out, and I owe you a commitment to do better." The conversation that followed was unlike any we had ever had. Honest, uncomfortable, and ultimately healing. He revealed that his participation in excluding me had been driven by his own fear of conflict and his desire to maintain his position as the easy child who never caused problems. "I thought if I sided with them against you, I'd be safe from their judgment," he admitted. "But I realized that a family that requires you to sacrifice someone else to feel secure isn't a family worth protecting." When I arrived home, the weight of familiar surroundings pressed down on me, but now it felt like putting on clothes that had been altered to fit better. The same rooms, the same photographs on the walls, but everything filtered through my new understanding of boundaries and self-respect. The first few days were a careful dance of reestablishing routines while maintaining the insights I had gained. I found myself naturally gravitating toward activities and people that had supported my growth, while instinctively avoiding situations that triggered old patterns of people-pleasing or conflict avoidance. The first family gathering I attended was small and deliberately structured. Sarah had organized a casual dinner at her house with just a few family members who had committed to more honest communication. The atmosphere was different from past gatherings. Less performative cheerfulness, more genuine conversation. During the dinner, something remarkable happened. When a disagreement arose, the kind that would have previously been swept under the rug or used as ammunition for future conflicts, we talked through it directly. It was awkward and imperfect, but it was real. For the first time in years, I felt like we were relating to each other as authentic people rather than playing assigned family roles. At one point during the evening, my aunt pulled me aside. Her eyes were red with unshed tears as she spoke. "I've been in therapy since everything happened," she said quietly. "I've learned some hard truths about how families can become toxic when they avoid dealing with problems directly. I want you to know that I'm committed to doing better, not just with you but with how I handle conflict in general." This conversation was followed by several others over the weeks that followed. Family members who had participated in the exclusion began taking accountability, not just for that specific incident, but for years of unhealthy patterns. Some enrolled in family therapy, others started individual counseling, and a few made concrete changes in how they approached relationships. I realized that my refusal to simply get over it, and my insistence on honest acknowledgement had created space for growth that wouldn't have been possible if I had just accepted their initial dismissive responses. By standing firm in my boundaries, I had inadvertently given others permission to examine their own behavior more critically. As weeks passed, we established new ways of being together that felt healthier and more sustainable. Family gatherings became smaller and more intentional. Conversations became deeper and more honest. Conflicts were addressed directly rather than allowed to fester into resentment. When a potential family celebration was proposed, a milestone birthday for my grandmother, I felt a complex mix of emotions. The old me would have been anxious about potential conflicts or disappointed by unmet expectations. The new me was cautiously optimistic, prepared to engage fully, while also ready to protect my well-being if necessary. The birthday celebration became a turning point for our family. Instead of the large, chaotic gatherings of the past that often left people feeling drained and frustrated, we organized a series of smaller, more meaningful interactions with my grandmother throughout her birthday week. Each gathering had a specific purpose and clear expectations, allowing for genuine connection without the pressure of forced harmony. At the main celebration, I found myself in the surreal position of being thanked by several family members for forcing the family to confront its dysfunctional patterns. "You saved us from ourselves," my cousin David said. "We were so comfortable with our toxic normal that we didn't realize how much damage we were doing to each other." But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when my grandmother, now fully informed about the family conflicts and their resolution, called me aside. "I'm proud of you," she said, her voice strong despite her age. "You did what I was never brave enough to do. You demanded that this family live up to its potential instead of settling for its dysfunction." Afterward, I reflected on how far we had come. The journey had been painful and uncertain, filled with moments of doubt and despair. Yet here we were, not perfect, not completely healed, but genuinely committed to treating each other with dignity and respect. I understood now that family was not a static entity, but a living, evolving system that required constant tending. It demanded not just love but courage, the courage to speak truth, to set boundaries, to hold people accountable, and to forgive without forgetting. The future remained unwritten, but I felt equipped to face it. I had learned to distinguish between reconciliation and rug sweeping, between forgiveness and enabling, between loyalty and self-sacrifice. Most importantly, I had learned that my worth was not contingent on others' approval or acceptance. As I settled back into my life, I carried with me the profound lesson that sometimes the greatest gift we can give to others is refusing to enable their worst behaviors. By demanding better treatment, I had not only protected my own dignity but had created space for genuine relationships to flourish. In the quiet moments, I often thought back to that empty hall, the silence that had once threatened to break me. Now I saw it not as a symbol of rejection but as the moment when my real life began. The life where I was the author of my own story, rather than a supporting character in someone else's dysfunction. I was grateful for the journey, for the pain that had forced me to grow, and for the family that, despite everything, had found a way to evolve. We had faced the storm together, and while we bore the scars, we had emerged stronger and more honest than before. The empty reunion had become the catalyst for the most meaningful family connections I had ever experienced. Sometimes I realized things had to break completely before they could be rebuilt properly. And sometimes the person brave enough to refuse to accept less than they deserved became the one who saved everyone else in the process.